Humanity has always believed itself to be the master of its own destiny, the architects of its own future. But the truth is that civilization is fragile, held together by order and reason, both of which can be shattered in an instant. The Maze Runner universe presents a vision of that collapse, a world where the great experiment of human progress has all but failed, leaving only the remnants of a once mighty species desperately scraping for survival. At the heart of this collapse is the flare, a virus unlike any before it. A biological catastrophe that has not only ravaged the bodies of its victims, but has also eroded the very foundations of human society. This disease does not merely kill. It twists, it degrades, and it corrupts, turning its host into something primal, something inhuman. But the flare is not the only force at play in this story. Desperate to preserve what little remains of civilization, a clandestine organization known as Wicked emerges from the ashes, armed with ruthless determination and an unwavering belief that sacrifice is necessary for salvation. Their goal is singular, to find a cure at any cost. It is within this brutal framework of survival and scientific experimentation that a group of unwitting test subjects, young and seemingly insignificant, become the focal point of one of the most complex and morally fraught conflicts in human history. These children, chosen for reasons beyond their own comprehension, are cast into a relentless series of trials designed to push the very limits of human endurance, intelligence, psychology, and morality. The maze, the scorch, the desperate fight for freedom, all of it is but a part of a grander design, a final gambit in humanity's losing war against an unseen enemy. For those trapped within Wicked's machinations, the line between savior and oppressor, between hope and despair, is blurred beyond recognition. What begins as a test of survival within an enclosed labyrinth quickly escalates into something far greater, a revelation of the sheer depths to which human beings will descend in their quest for salvation. Every action, every betrayal, and every sacrifice is justified under the same singular doctrine. Wicked is good, but in a world where the lines between good and evil are eroded by desperation, who is to say what is right and what is merely necessary? This is the story of the flare virus and its devastating legacy, a legacy written in suffering and loss, in the madness of the infected, and in the moral compromises of those who sought to contain it. It is a story of civilization's final, gasping breath, of a world that has already fallen but refuses to admit it. It is a tale of deception, control, and rebellion. Above all, it is a story of survival, of a desperate race against time, where those who hold the power to save humanity might also be its greatest threat. Hey guys, what's happening? Niat here with Film Comics Explained, and today we're diving into the entire The Maze Runner series, exploring the crippling solar flares that destroyed civilization, the horrifying flare virus that emerged from the chaos, the rise of Wicked, all three films, followed by a breakdown of the differences between the movies and the novels.
You may not realize it, but you're very important. As you'll no doubt soon discover, not everyone agrees with our methods. I can only assure you that everything that's happened to you, everything we've done to you, it was all done for a reason.
The end of the world did not come in fire or ice, but in light, blinding, all-consuming, and merciless. For centuries, humanity had feared its own hubris would be the catalyst for its downfall. Nuclear war, environmental collapse, economic ruin. These were the disasters that haunted the collective imagination. Yet, when the end arrived, it was not of mankind's own making, but an indifferent cosmic inevitability. The sun, the very source of life, turned against its children, unleashing an inferno of solar flares so powerful that it set the skies ablaze, reshaping the Earth in ways beyond human control. Civilization, soft and blind to its own vulnerability, was unprepared for what followed. The solar storms crippled satellites, burned away power grids, and sent shockwaves of electromagnetic fury cascading across the planet. The technological world, the intricate, delicate web upon which modern society depended, was obliterated in mere hours. Planes fell from the sky, communication networks collapsed, and the infrastructure that had taken centuries to build was reduced to nothing more than smoldering wreckage. The very concept of order disintegrated. Governments, unable to comprehend the scale of the disaster, found themselves powerless as cities burned, supply chains crumbled, and entire nations were plunged into chaos. But the true devastation was yet to come. The solar flares did not merely disrupt, they transformed. The heat they unleashed upon the planet was not an ordinary summer's warmth, but an unrelenting, global inferno that pushed the Earth to the brink of an irreversible climate shift. Polar ice caps quickly shattered into the sea. Rising ocean levels swallowed coastal cities in days, leaving only remnants of skyscrapers jutting out from waves like gravestones marking the end of the old world. Billions had perished in the fires, their bodies incinerated or lost beneath the rising seas. Then the atmosphere itself changed, battered by radiation that seeped into the soil, the water, and the very DNA of those who had survived. With the natural world now in revolt, civilization's final threads began to unravel. Food became scarce. Crops, unable to withstand the violent temperature shifts, withered and died. Water sources, once plentiful, turned toxic under the onslaught of radiation and pollution. What remained of human society fractured into desperation and violence. Nations turned against each other in a last frantic bid for survival, launching wars for the dwindling remnants of arable land and drinkable water. Refugees flooded from the ruins of the old world, seeking shelter in places already stretched beyond capacity. Borders became battlefields, law became a memory. Then came the sickness. It did not appear immediately, nor did it strike with the sudden, violent force of the solar flares. It crept in slowly, hidden within the chaos, mistaken at first for the byproducts of famine and radiation poisoning. People grew weaker, their minds fraying at the edges. What began as paranoia soon turned to delusion, then to madness. The infected became violent, erratic, and driven by an insatiable hunger that was not for food, but for carnage. The flare, as it would come to be known, was unlike any disease before it, a sickness that did not simply kill, but stripped away reason itself, reducing its victims to creatures that were no longer human. In the ashes of the world that had once been, there was no hope for a cure. Medicine, hospitals, doctors. These had been relics of a time when humanity still had the means to fight against nature, but nature had already won. The remnants of civilization, scattered and broken, could do nothing but watch as a disease spread, carried by those fleeing from one ruined city to another, turning the last survivors into little more than walking nightmares. For those who still clung to some semblance of order, there was only one option left: containment. Entire regions were sealed off, their populations abandoned to fate. Governments, what few remained, enacted martial law so brutal that the line between survival and genocide became indistinguishable. The flare thus became the final symptom of humanity's collapse, the last cruel twist in a fate that had already been sealed. By the time Wicked rose from the ashes, the world as it had been was gone. What remained was a barren, hostile wasteland, divided between those who had been infected and those who lived in constant fear of becoming so. The fight for a cure had begun, but the cost would be greater than anyone could have imagined. The flare did not begin as a weapon, nor was it the result of scientific ambition gone wrong. It was something that arose from inevitability. When the world burned, when the skies turned to fire and the ocean swallowed entire continents, the careful balance upon which life had depended for millennia was shattered. The old rules of nature no longer applied. Ecosystems collapsed, species vanished, and in their place, something new emerged. It was here, in the broken remnants of a dying planet, that the flare was born. At first, it was unremarkable. Scientists searching for answers amid the ruins of civilization dismissed it as nothing more than another microbe, an inconsequential mutation among the many that had begun to surface in the wake of the solar flares. The extreme conditions, rising temperatures, increased radiation, the unchecked spread of pathogens that had once been contained by human intervention had turned the Earth into an uncontrolled petri dish, an environment in which diseases could evolve at an unprecedented rate. But even then, the flare was different. It did not act like plagues of the past, did not follow the familiar patterns of infection and immunity that humanity had spent centuries learning to control. It spread slowly at first, slipping unnoticed through the crumbling infrastructure of a world too preoccupied with its own survival to recognize the threat. Some believed it was a direct result of climate collapse, a mutation born in the depths of the Earth's permafrost, long-frozen bacteria and viruses suddenly awoken by the planet's rising heat. Others suspected it had always existed, lurking in obscurity, waiting for the moment when human society was weak enough to fall victim to it. There were also those who theorized that it had been accelerated by radiation exposure, its genetic code altered in ways beyond human comprehension, adapting at an impossible speed to its new environment. Whatever its origin, the result was the same. The flare did not simply infect, it corrupted. It did not kill quickly, like an efficient virus designed to burn through a population before extinguishing itself. Instead, it lingered, spreading its influence over weeks, months, even years, as it methodically dismantled the minds of those it touched. The first cases were written off as psychological disorders, the inevitable consequence of prolonged stress, famine, and exposure to a world that had turned against its inhabitants. Survivors of the solar flares already exhibited symptoms of paranoia, disorientation, and aggression, common effects of trauma and malnutrition. When people began to speak of hallucinations, of hearing voices, of feeling their own thoughts slipping away from them, the warnings were ignored. Even when the first acts of mindless, violent rage occurred, when individuals turned on their own families, their own communities, authorities dismissed it as nothing more than desperation and lawlessness in a world where both had become commonplace. By the time the truth was understood, it was too late. Unlike viruses that attack the body, the flare worked its way into the brain, rewriting the very fabric of a person's identity. The infected retained the appearance of who they once were, but their minds were no longer their own. At first, they struggled, fighting against the erosion of their sanity, clinging to the last remnants of their former selves. But the longer the infection took hold, the more that resistance faded, and in its place, something monstrous emerged. The cranks, as they would come to be known, were not mindless. They were not the shambling corpses of old-world horror stories, nor were they mere animals driven by hunger alone. They were something worse, humans who had been hollowed out from within, who still carried echoes of their past selves, but were ruled by the unrelenting impulses of the disease. Some retained fragments of their intelligence, their memories, even their emotions, but all of it was twisted, corrupted into something unrecognizable. As the infection advanced, they lost the ability to reason, to control their actions, to recognize their loved ones. In the final stages, all that remained was raw instinct, an insatiable drive towards chaos and destruction, towards spreading the sickness that had consumed them. There was no hope for containment. When the world realized what was happening, the flare had already spread beyond control, carried unknowingly by those who fled the ruins of civilization, by refugees searching for safety, by the desperate and the dying, who believed they were running towards salvation, but were, in truth, bringing the infection with them. Governments collapsed under the weight of the crisis, their remaining resources exhausted in futile attempts to quarantine the afflicted. Cities were abandoned, entire populations left to fend for themselves as the last vestiges of order crumbled. The flare was not the first disaster to strike humanity, but it was the final one. It ensured that civilization could never rebuild. It turned the survivors against one another, shattered what little unity remained, and ensured that in the new world, fear would reign supreme.
It is violent, unpredictable, incurable, or so we thought.
An enzyme produced by the brains of the immune. Once separated from the bloodstream, it can serve as a powerful agent.
The young would have to be tested, even sacrificed, inside harsh environments where their brain activity could be studied.
Of course, that didn't stop Wicked. If they had their way, they'd sacrifice an entire generation.
To comprehend the flare, one must first understand the mechanisms by which real-world pathogens operate. The flare is a prion-like infection, though it does not behave precisely like known prion diseases such as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease or Kuru. Prions are misfolded proteins that propagate by converting normal proteins into their corrupted form, accumulating within the brain and leading to cognitive decline, loss of motor function, and ultimately death. The flare shares similarities with these conditions, but rather than being confined to slow, degenerative processes, it exhibits traits more commonly found in viral encephalitis, where inflammation of the brain leads to aggressive behavior, confusion, and personality changes. Rabies is the closest real-world analog, a virus that infiltrates the nervous system, hijacking its host's behavior and driving them into a state of hyperaggression before ultimately causing organ failure. However, unlike rabies, the flare allows them to linger, to fester, to suffer. What makes the flare so dangerous is its ability to specifically target the brain's higher functions, while leaving other physiological systems intact for prolonged periods. In the initial stages, it appears to interfere with the limbic system, the region responsible for emotion, behavior, and long-term memory. This results in paranoia, erratic mood swings, and heightened aggression, similar to the effects of neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's or frontotemporal dementia. But the infected retain full motor function, their bodies remaining strong even as their minds deteriorate. At first, the symptoms are subtle, almost undetectable, easily mistaken for the common strains of mental fatigue and paranoia that already plague the survivors of a world in ruin. The infected experience mild forgetfulness, brief moments of confusion, or sudden bursts of irrational behavior. They react with uncharacteristic irritability or misinterpret conversations, losing the ability to follow simple thoughts. By the time the infected themselves realize something is wrong, the disease has already rooted itself deep within their minds. It is no longer a question of if they will lose themselves, but when. As the infection progresses, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic, reasoning, and impulse control, begins to degrade. This mirrors the symptoms seen in severe cases of syphilitic dementia, but unlike bacterial infections which can be halted with antibiotics if caught early, the flare cannot. It is not a simple pathogen that can be eradicated, it is an adaptive force, one that has integrated itself too deeply into the neural pathways of its victims to be undone. In this later stage, the symptoms become more pronounced. Memory loss accelerates. Those afflicted forget where they are, fail to recognize familiar faces, or lose track of time entirely. Simple tasks become difficult, then impossible. Some recognize what is happening to them and struggle against it, fighting to hold on to their last remnants of sanity, clinging to memories before they are erased completely. Others descend into panic, into despair, lashing out as the walls of their own minds begin to crumble around them. Aggression soon follows. The infected become unpredictable, volatile, prone to fits of sudden, unprovoked violence. They lash out at friends, at strangers, at anyone who comes too close, their actions governed by impulses they no longer understand. The final stages of infection resemble the effects of advanced neurotoxoplasmosis, a parasitic disease known to manipulate behavior. Toxoplasma gondii, a parasite that commonly infects rodents, alters their brain chemistry to make them fearless in the presence of predators, increasing the likelihood of their consumption by cats, in which the parasite completes its reproductive cycle. The flare exhibits a similar form of behavioral manipulation. The infected do not merely lose control, they're compelled to spread the disease. What begins as angry outbursts soon escalates into something more terrifying, an insatiable need to destroy. Rationality disintegrates, and yet through it all, they remain aware, just enough to suffer. This is what makes the flare unlike any other disease before it. It forces its victims to endure their own decay, to witness the collapse of their identity, to feel themselves unravel piece by piece. What remained of civilization began referring to these infected as cranks, a term that did little to capture the sheer horror of what they'd become. Society began to fracture under the weight of its own fear. Towns and cities that had clung to a fragile semblance of order collapsed overnight, paranoia sweeping through the last bastions of humanity. Neighbors turned on each other, families tore themselves apart. No one could be trusted. To show signs of the disease, no matter how minor, was to be marked for death. Vigilante executions became commonplace. There was no trial, no mercy, only swift, brutal eradication. But the executions came too late. The flare had already spread. The infected hunted in packs, moving together with a terrifying coordination, tearing through settlements and outposts with ruthless efficiency. These final stage cranks were unrecognizable from the people they had once been. The world had no way to fight them, and those who remained uninfected had only one choice: run. As a result, cities were abandoned, entire regions left to the cranks, vast wastelands of the lost and the damned. What remained were scattered enclaves, desperate communities clinging to whatever remnants of stability they could create. Some built walled settlements, fortresses of steel and concrete where entry was strictly controlled, where any signs of infection was met with immediate and unforgiving execution. Others became nomadic, moving constantly, never staying in one place long enough for the flare to reach them. There were also those who turned to violence, to raiding and conquest, believing that in the new world, survival belonged to those willing to take what they needed by force. What became clear was that the world they'd inherited no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the flare, to the sickness that had rewritten the rules of life itself. And the cranks, mindless, hungry, relentless, were its new rulers.
In spite of everything we've done to them, at least we gave them the tools they'll need to survive. Maybe they'll succeed where we failed.
When the old institutions of power crumbled, in their place, something new was born out of necessity. Wicked was not a government, it was not a nation, nor was it bound by any law that had existed before. It was an organization, a final, desperate attempt to halt the inevitable, an experiment in salvation, conducted by those who believed they alone held the key to humanity's survival. The World in Catastrophe Kill Zone Experiment Department did not operate with the constraints of morality, nor did it concern itself with the ethics of its actions. There was only one objective: to find a cure, to end the flare, and to do so, anything and everything was permissible.
Is that gonna make me better?
I hope so.
We've never been this close to a cure, and we've sacrificed a lot to get this far. Don't let those sacrifices be for nothing.
I'm sorry, Teresa. You did everything you could.
The world's remaining scientists and medical experts gathered under a single banner, uniting their resources, their knowledge, and their desperation into one cause. The name itself was a reflection of their purpose. The world was already in devastation. The only thing that remained was the experiment, the search for a way forward, for an answer that had thus far eluded them. The kill zone, a reference to the brain's most vital functions, was the key. It was the neural pathways that were attacked, the higher cognitive functions that were eroded, and Wicked's researchers believed that if they could understand how the virus operated inside the brain, if they could find those who were immune and study them, they could reverse engineer a cure. The only way to study the flare was in real time, to observe its effects on the human mind in controlled environments, to push the infected to their limits and see what could be learned from their suffering. And so Wicked built its experiments, not in sterile laboratories, but in the ruins of the old world. They gathered subjects, children who had been identified as immune, and placed them into trials designed to test their resilience, their intelligence, their ability to endure. Every variable was accounted for, every possible outcome predicted and controlled.
It's amazing what people can accomplish when their survival's at stake. Squeeze them hard enough, there's nothing they can't do. No line they won't cross.
To those within Wicked, there was no question of whether what they were doing was wrong or right. Morality was a relic of the past, an obsolete concept that had no place in a world on the brink of extinction. The question was not whether these experiments should be conducted, it was whether they would work. And so, one by one, the trials began. The maze was their first and most ambitious creation, a controlled environment where their subjects could be studied without interference from the chaos of the outside world. Each participant had their memories stripped, their past erased, their entire existence reduced to a single purpose: to survive. It was within this carefully constructed prison that Wicked hoped to find answers.
How many more people do they have to round up, torture, kill? Huh? When the hell does it stop?
It stops when we find a cure.
But even within the organization itself, divisions began to form. Some saw Wicked as the last hope of mankind, an institution that had been forced to make impossible choices for the greater good. Others saw it as an entity that had long since lost sight of its own humanity, one that had become as much a threat as the virus it sought to cure. As the trials continued, as the subjects suffered and died, as the experiments grew more ruthless in their pursuit of results, the cracks within Wicked's foundation widened. Some believed that the cure was within reach, that the suffering was justified. Others questioned whether there was ever going to be a cure at all. What had begun as an organization dedicated to salvation had become something else. It had become a machine, one that existed only to perpetuate itself, one that justified its every atrocity with a simple refrain: wicked is good. But survival is not justification. Necessity is not morality. Wicked did not operate within the constraints of ethics, nor did it concern itself with the consequences of its own actions. It was an entity that existed solely for the pursuit of its objective, and it wielded that purpose with the cold, unwavering efficiency of a machine. In the eyes of its architects, every decision, no matter how brutal, was justified. Every sacrifice, no matter how great, was necessary. They did not see themselves as villains or believe they were committing atrocities. They were, in their own minds, the last hope of mankind, and if humanity had to suffer for its own salvation, then so be it. But where is the line? At what point does necessity become cruelty? At what point does sacrifice become murder? Wicked believed that the ends justified the means, that the lives lost in their experiments were a price worth paying for the survival of the species. They saw the infected as a problem to be solved, a disease to be eradicated. They saw the immune as tools, instruments to be studied and used in the search for a cure. The world had already lost billions, and if a few more had to die to save the species, then Wicked would ensure that they did. But what the organization failed to understand, what they refused to acknowledge, was that survival is not just about endurance. It is not just about outlasting the enemy. A species does not endure through force alone, nor does it rebuild itself through cruelty and suffering. The cure they sought, the salvation they believed they could create, was built on a foundation of blood and despair. They were not preserving humanity, they were erasing it. Because what is humanity without choice, without freedom, without compassion? the very things that separate it from the mindless violence of the infected. They essentially became indistinguishable from the disease they sought to cure. The flare did not ask for consent. It didn't care for the lives it destroyed. It did not hesitate or question or weigh the morality of its existence. It simply consumed. And in their pursuit of victory, Wicked became the same. They justified their actions with the belief that the world needed them. But the world did not need Wicked. It needed something else. Something they had long since abandoned. It needed hope. It needed humanity. Wicked was not born from malice or greed. It was born from desperation, from the unrelenting need to fix a world that could not be fixed. But intent does not erase consequence. Belief does not absolve action. Wicked may have been created to save the world, but in the end, all it did was prove that some things are worse than extinction. Wicked was not the answer. It was merely another symptom of a world that had already fallen.
In time, a new generation emerged that could survive the virus. Suddenly, there was hope for a cure.
Hope is a dangerous thing. Hope has killed more of my friends than the flare and the scorch combined.
The virus is airborne. It's inside the walls. The serum was our last chance.
You really telling me that you're giving up?
It's not about giving up, Jansen. It's about knowing when you've lost.
The Maze Runner opens with Thomas, our protagonist, waking to darkness and the feeling of being lifted upward. His mind is blank, his identity erased, his memories lost. The sound of grinding metal surrounds him, and as the elevator ascends, he catches glimpses of supply crates marked with the letters WCKD. Then the ceiling opens and blinding light floods in. Rough hands pull him into the open air, and he finds himself surrounded by a group of boys in a large grassy expanse, enclosed by massive stone walls.
Hey, we got a runner!
Panic sets in and Thomas walks towards the opening, but his path is cut off by one of the boys, Gally, who forcefully subdues him before he can run into the maze, a massive labyrinth beyond the walls that no one has ever escaped. Albie, the group's leader and the first to arrive in this place, introduces Thomas to the way of life in the glade. The elevator, known as the Box, delivers a new boy every month along with supplies, but none of them remember their past. In time, they recall their names, but nothing more.
I can't remember anything. Why can't I remember anything? Okay.
Over the years, the Gladers have formed a society. Some are builders, others are medjacks or cooks, but the most important role belongs to the runners, who venture into the maze by day, searching for an exit. Every night, the doors to the maze close, and beyond them lurk the Grievers, deadly biomechanical creatures that hunt anything left inside. No one who has been trapped in the maze overnight has ever returned.
You think you might make it?
No one survives a night in the maze. You just gotta forget about him.
Thomas quickly befriends Chuck, one of the youngest Gladers, a boy who arrived the month before. During a sparring match with Gally, Thomas suddenly remembers his name.
I remember my name! I'm Thomas! Thomas!
The next day, he begins adjusting to life in the glade, learning its rules and structures. But when Ben, a runner, is stung by a Griever, everything changes. The attack leaves Ben in a violent, deranged state, and he accuses Thomas, screaming that he's seen him before. With the infection irreversible, Ben is exiled, cast into the maze as the doors close for the night. The Grievers are essentially hybrids of biology and technology, grotesque amalgamations of living tissue and artificial components designed to instill terror. They existed to enforce the rules of the maze, to eliminate those who strayed too far, to ensure that the trials remained a constant, unrelenting struggle. The mere sound of their approach, the grinding of metal against stone, the clicking of mechanical limbs, the low guttural growls of something not quite organic, was enough to send fear coursing through even the bravest of survivors. Wicked had designed them to respond not just to movement or sound, but to the behaviors of the gliders themselves. They were adaptive, evolving within the constraints of their programming, ensuring that the maze never became predictable, never became safe.
Oh, get the hell off me!
To be stung by a Griever was to suffer a fate worse than death. They injected a serum, a chemical payload engineered by Wicked that triggered a violent reaction inside the brain. Victims experienced excruciating pain, their minds overwhelmed with a flood of memories, fragments of their past lives forced upon them in a chaotic, uncontrolled surge. It was not just physical agony, it was psychological torture.
He's been stung.
No, please don't do it. I can get better later.
What, Albie? Yeah. What's gonna happen to him?
Haunted by the encounter with Ben, Thomas dreams of a mysterious woman telling him Wicked is good. The following day, Albie and Mino retrace Ben's steps to investigate what happened. As dusk falls, the gliders gather at the maze entrance, watching in horror as Mino appears, dragging an injured Albie. With seconds to spare before the doors shut, Thomas rushes into the maze to help them, but the doors close behind him.
Good job. You just killed yourself.
Without a way out, the pair suspend Albie on the vines of the maze walls, hoping to keep him hidden from the Grievers. Soon enough, a creature emerges and Mino flees, but Thomas, using the maze's mechanics against it, lures the Griever into a narrowing passage, crushing it between colliding walls. For the very first time, a glader has killed a Griever, and by dawn, Mino and Thomas return to the glade carrying Albie.
I saw Griever.
He didn't just see it, he killed it.
Then the impossible happens. The box returns ahead of schedule. Inside is not supplies, but a girl, Teresa, the very first to appear in the glade. She calls out Thomas's name, though he doesn't remember her, and in her hand is a note. She is the last one ever.
Thomas.
You still think I'm overreacting?
Gally, unsettled by Thomas's actions, blames him for disrupting the order and demands punishment, fearing that the Griever's aggression is a response to Thomas's interference. But Newt, who's second in command, declares he's to be made a runner.
After Albie got stung, they're not in any hurry to get back out there. Where are you? I think it's time we find out what we're really up against.
After examining the remains of the Griever he killed, inside its corpse, they discover a mechanical device marked with the letters WCKD, flashing the number 7. They realize the maze sections open in specific patterns, and this device may be the key to their escape.
People needed to believe we had a chance of getting out, but maybe now we have a real chance.
Teresa, now awake, remembers her name immediately, something that has never happened before. She also recognizes Thomas. Though their memories remain fragmented, Thomas also recalls fleeting images of her. In her possession are 2 syringes containing an unknown substance, and Thomas decides to use one on Albie. To their astonishment, he begins to recover.
What do you remember?
You're always their favorite, Thomas. Always.
Unfortunately, that night, the glade's defenses fail. The doors remain open and the Grievers flood in. Panic and carnage erupt as they tear through the gladers, killing many, including Albie.
Get them out!
In the aftermath, Thomas pieces together a theory. Those who've been stung regain their memories, and so, desperate for the truth, he injects himself with a severed stinger, enduring unbearable pain as his mind unlocks and he remembers the truth. He learns the maze is not a prison, it is a test, and the gladers are subjects in an experiment.
Wicked is good.
A divide splits the group and Thomas leads his followers into the maze, navigating their way to an area marked as Wicked's loading dock. Fighting through waves of Grievers, they input a code based on the maze's opening sequence and escape, leaving the creatures trapped behind. Beyond the exit, they find themselves in a laboratory. A video recording them plays and Dr. Ava Page appears, explaining that the world has fallen to the flare and Wicked has been conducting experiments to find a cure. Before the recording ends, she appears to take her own life.
Unfortunately, your trials have only just begun. And remember, Wicked is good.
As the survivors process this revelation, Gally emerges, holding a gun and showing signs that he was stung by a Griever. He declares that they were meant to stay in the glade, and, overcome with madness, he fires at Thomas, but Chuck throws himself in front of the bullet, sacrificing himself. In a rage, Mino throws a spear, impaling Gally. It's here that armed figures enter, escorting the remaining gladers outside to helicopters. As they're flown away, they see a vast wasteland, a shattered world beyond their comprehension, and far below, deep in the facility they left behind, Ava Page watches. The experiment was a success. More survived than anticipated, but the real test, Phase 2, is about to begin. TheScorch Trials begins with a glimpse into Thomas's past, with his mother handing him over to a group of soldiers, knowing that she will never see him again. The last thing he remembers is the face of Dr. Ava Page, telling him that everything is going to be alright.
Wake up, we gotta go!
In the present, Thomas and the remaining gladers, Newt, Teresa, Mino, Frypan and Winston, have escaped the maze and are brought to a massive facility by a group of mercenaries. The outside world is a wasteland, the remains of a civilization now reduced to ruins. As they're led inside, they're introduced to Jansen, the man in charge who promises them safety, food, and shelter from the horrors of the flare.
Why are you helping us?
Let's just say the world out there is in a rather precarious situation, and we're all hanging on by a very thin thread.
As they settle in, Thomas and his friends realize that they're not the only ones who survived the maze. The facility houses other groups, suggesting Wicked's experiments extended far beyond the glade. Among them is a boy named Aris, who spent longer than anyone else in a different maze, one populated mostly by girls. When Jansen begins selecting individuals for relocation, Teresa is taken away without explanation.
The fact that you kids can survive the flare virus makes you the best chance of humanity's continued survival.
You know what they do with them? I don't know. This is as far as we've ever gotten.
Suspicion grows within Thomas, and late at night, Aris sneaks him through the ventilation system to reveal a hidden truth. Bodies being wheeled into a research lab, their fates unknown. Thomas realizes that something is terribly wrong, and the next day he stages a distraction, stealing an ID badge from a guard before he and Aris break out, searching for Teresa that night. What they find is horrifying. Dozens of unconscious individuals suspended in a mechanical apparatus, all subjected to unknown experiments. They also overhear Jansen speaking with Ava Page, revealing that they're not saviors, they're still wicked, and they're still experimenting on the immunes, trying to extract the key to curing the flare.
Early results have been extremely promising. Whatever it is you've been doing to them in there, it's working.
Determined to escape, Thomas gathers the group and they overpower a guard and force a scientist to take them to Teresa. As the alarms blare, the group fights their way through the facility. Jansen tries to stop them, warning that they will not survive in the scorch, but they escape, fleeing into the desert.
Go! Go! We'll lose him in the storm!
Their journey is brutal. The sun is merciless and the terrain is nothing but sand and ruins. Seeking shelter, they stumble upon a seemingly abandoned building, but it quickly turns into a death trap as cranks emerge from the shadows. The creatures pursue them relentlessly, forcing them to fight for their lives, but as they flee, Winston is scratched by a crank, dooming him to infection. Unfortunately, Winston's condition deteriorates. Refusing to turn into a monster, he says his goodbyes and shoots himself as the group continues on. The survivors press forward, only to be caught in a devastating lightning storm. The sky erupts with electricity, sending bolts crashing into the sand, and Mino is struck but survives. Desperate for safety, they seek shelter in a nearby warehouse, where they're met by a new threat, Brenda and Jorge, scavengers who have survived by staying hidden.
No one's come out of the Scorch in a long time. You've just got them curious. And me too.
The group recognize the markings on the gliders' necks and realize they're from Wicked. This makes them valuable. Jorge, their leader and Brenda's surrogate father, is particularly interested when he hears they're searching for the Right Arm, a rumored resistance group.
Right on. If they're really against Wicked, maybe they can help us.
Of course, before they can negotiate further, Wicked mercenaries led by Jansen storm the compound. In the chaos, Jorge triggers an explosive trap, destroying the facility and killing most of the mercs. Unfortunately, as a result, the group is separated and Thomas and Brenda are forced to flee on their own, pursued by cranks. Their escape leads them to an underground club run by a man named Marcus. The place is a haven for survivors, and Marcus claims to have connections to the Right Arm. But instead of providing immediate help, he drugs Thomas and Brenda, sending them into a disoriented, hallucinogenic state. When Thomas wakes, he finds himself reunited with the group as Jorge interrogates Marcus, brutally beating him until he reveals the location of the Right Arm. The group leaves, taking Marcus's vehicle and heading towards the mountains, but as they approach, they're ambushed and surrounded by armed survivors. Among them are two young women, Harriet and Sonia, who recognize Aris from the maze, and realizing the gliders are not a threat, they lead them to the resistance base.
Do you know where they are?
Hop in.
There they meet Vince, the leader of the Right Arm, and Mary Cooper, a former Wicked scientist who now works against the organization. When Brenda collapses, Vince nearly executes her, believing she's been infected, but Mary intervenes, revealing that Thomas was once an informant who helped smuggle information out of Wicked. She then administers an experimental enzyme using Thomas's blood that halts Brenda's infection, saving her life.
The enzyme can't be manufactured, only harvested from the immune, the young.
That night, Thomas reflects on everything that's happened, remembering Chuck's sacrifice and the pain of all they've lost. But Teresa is hiding a secret. She's never given up on Wicked's mission, and believing that the infected can still be saved, she betrays the group, revealing their location to Jansen and Paige. As Wicked's aircrafts approach, Thomas realizes what she's done, but it's too late. Explosions rip into the compound as Wicked soldiers storm in, killing indiscriminately. Mary Cooper is then executed for her betrayal. Mino is shot with a stun gun, and Teresa joins Wicked, standing by Ava's side.
Oh, Teresa's always had an evolved appreciation of the greater good.
This is the only way. We have to find a cure.
As chaos unfolds, Brenda and Jorge fight back, allowing Thomas to escape. Jansen nearly kills him, but Brenda intervenes, shooting him in the shoulder. In a desperate act, Thomas detonates a bomb, which kickstarts another battle and forces Wicked to flee. By morning, the battle is over. Wicked has taken what they've come for. Mino is gone, the Right Arm is in ruins, and the survivors are left broken and without hope. But Thomas refuses to accept defeat. Gathering what supplies he can carry, he declares his intent to infiltrate Wicked and take Mino back. Vince warns him that it's suicide, but Harriet and the others agree. If there's a chance to strike back, they will take it. The war against Wicked is no longer just about survival. It's now about revenge.
It's not just about me, no. It's about everyone Wicked's ever taken, everyone they will take. They'll never stop.
The Death Cure opens with Thomas, the Right Arm, and the remaining Gladers launching a desperate mission to free Mino and the other immunes. Their plan is to intercept a heavily guarded train carrying prisoners to the last city, Wicked's headquarters. As the train speeds across the wasteland, they board it while Jorge and Brenda provide cover. A chaotic battle erupts as Thomas and Vince detach one of the train cars, allowing Newt and the others to lift it away to safety.
Go! Go! All right, we're clear! We're going home, baby!
However, Thomas realizes Mino was not among the freed prisoners, and so, determined to find him, he prepares to leave, with Newt and Frypan insisting on joining him. Despite warnings that the last city is a fortress, the three set out alone.
Well, we started this together. May as well end it that way too.
Meanwhile, inside Wicked's facility, Mino is trapped in a psychological simulation, forced to relive his maze experience, hunted by Grievers while being drained of his blood. Overseeing the experiments is Ava Page with Teresa by his side, wrestling with the moral cost of their actions. Thomas Newton Frypan's journey takes him through a checkpoint leading to the last city, which is infested with cranks. Just as hope seems lost, Brenda and Jorge arrive in time, gunning down the cranks and rescuing them. The group then push forward, only to find the city walled off, protected by Wicked's military forces.
Spent 3 years trapped behind walls trying to break out, and now we want to break back in.
Inside the city, Ava and Teresa meet with the Wicked board, pressing for approval to escalate their experiments. Despite opposition, Teresa convinces them the trials must continue, as the cure is within reach.
Those memories, there's no reason to keep holding on to them. It's a simple procedure.
Thank you.
I want to remember. If we find a cure, that's the only way all this was worth it.
Outside the city walls, the Gladers witness a protest as civilians demand entry, seeking refuge and treatment, but Wicked soldiers respond mercilessly, opening fire indiscriminately. Chaos erupts and, in the confusion, masked figures seize Thomas and his friends.
Thomas, this doesn't feel right!
Hey, guys, we gotta go now! Look!
When they reach safety, Jorge unmasks one of their captors and attacks him, only to reveal Gally, long presumed dead. Thomas reacts with fury, punching him in retaliation for Chuck's murder, but Gally, now allied with the rebellion, offers his help. He leads him to Lawrence, a resistance leader deformed by the virus, who offers him a way into the city in exchange for their support in overthrowing Wicked.
I am a businessman, which means that I don't take unnecessary risks. Wicked is something we both want. Gally, show him the way.
Inside Wicked's labs, Teresa continues experiments with Mino's blood, testing it on a young infected girl named Cheyenne, but her hopes are dashed when the girl deteriorates further. Gally informs Thomas and Newt that the only way into Wicked's stronghold is through Teresa. Thomas is reluctant, unwilling to face her, but Newt, growing weaker from a flare infection, confronts him, sensing that his feelings are clouding his judgment.
So if there is even the slightest chance we can get him out of there, then we have to take that, no matter what the cost.
Thomas ultimately orchestrates a meeting with Teresa, leading her into an alley where Gally captures her. Once she learns of their plan to infiltrate Wicked, she agrees to help, warning that they need her fingerprint to access the facility.
See, that's what I like about you, Teresa. No matter how bleak things get, you never give up.
She, Thomas, Newt, and Gally then make their way inside, and as Gally searches for a cure and rescues the imprisoned immunes, the others locate Mino and free him, escaping by diving into a pool from a shattered window. When Teresa creates a diversion, Gally leads the captive children outside, while Frypan helps extract them onto a bus. However, the vehicle's weight is too much for their crane, and it collapses, plunging into the city below.
They're the ones who started this war, but tonight, we will finish it.
Meanwhile, Lawrence unleashes his plan. Leading an army of infected rebels, he drives an explosive rigged van into the city's walls, blasting it open and unleashing destruction. As a result, the infected flood the streets and Wicked's control begins to crumble. Teresa's voice then rings out over the city's speakers, telling Thomas that his blood is actually the key to the cure. As they make their way to the rendezvous point, Newt succumbs to the flare, turning into a crank. This causes him to attack Thomas, but in a final moment of clarity, he pleads for Thomas to end his suffering. Devastated, Thomas stabs him through the heart. Inside the collapsing headquarters, Thomas confronts Ava Page, who tries to reason with him, before being killed by Jansen. He then drags Thomas to a lab, preparing to extract his blood, but reveals that only the elite will receive the cure.
The only question is, who will be the ones left standing?
Now completely disillusioned by Wicked, Teresa betrays Jansen, striking him down. A violent struggle ensues, with Jansen gaining the upper hand, until Thomas shatters a containment cell, releasing infected that maul Jansen to death. As Wicked's headquarters crumbles, Thomas and Teresa make their way to the rooftop, where their friends arrive in a stolen aircraft. She's able to help Thomas jump to safety, but as she turns to follow, a neighboring building collapses on Wicked's tower, sealing Teresa's fate. The movie ends with the survivors fleeing to an island, Wicked's rumored safe haven, which becomes their new home, free from the horrors of the flare. Mino hands Thomas Newt's necklace, and inside he finds a note, a final message from his friend, thanking Thomas for standing by him and urging him to take care of their people. As the survivors carve the names of the people they lost into stone, Thomas etches Chuck, Newt, and Teresa into the rock. Standing alone on the shore, he gazes out at the ocean, the last vial of serum clutched in his hand. The fight is over, the war is won, but the cost of survival lingers in the quiet of the waves, the memory of all they've endured never truly fading.
That I'm not scared. Well, not of dying. It's losing myself to this virus. That's what scares me.
The Maze Runner series exists in two distinct forms, the original novels by James Dashnar and their cinematic adaptations. While both effectively tell the same overarching story, the collapse of civilization, the rise of Wicked, the trials of the immunes, and the desperate search for a future, the way they approach that narrative differs significantly. The books are methodical, structured like a slow unraveling of truth, each revelation peeling back another layer of deception, another layer of suffering. The films, by contrast, are faster, leaner, more streamlined, stripping away certain complexities in favor of momentum, of action, of a world that feels raw and immediate. They are fundamentally different in tone, execution, and ultimately in how they shape the meaning of the story itself. One of the most notable differences lies in the nature of Wicked. In the books, Wicked is an omnipresent force, an organization whose reach extends far beyond the immediate struggles of Thomas and his allies. The books take their time revealing the full extent of Wicked's influence, making it clear that their control is not limited to the maze, or the scorch, or even the supposed safe zones. They have infiltrated every remaining facet of civilization, and their authority is absolute. The films, however, reduce Wicked to something more tangible, something easier to fight. They're still powerful, still ruthless, but they're not as omniscient. There are effectively cracks in their armor, weaknesses that can be exploited. This shift in Wicked's portrayal affects the core conflict of the series. In the books, Thomas and his allies are not revolutionaries fighting a clear enemy. They're test subjects trying to break free of an experiment that continues to pull them back, no matter how far they run. The book emphasizes that Wicked's power comes not just from their resources or their control, but from the sheer fact that they believe they're right. The films, however, lean more into the direct rebellion narrative. Wicked is still dangerous, but is more overtly villainous. Characterization also changes between the two mediums. Thomas in the books is driven by a need for understanding. He is analytical, constantly questioning the reality around him, struggling with the weight of his past and his role in Wicked's designs. His development is gradual, his transformation from a test subject into a leader happening over time, through experience, through loss, through revelations that shape his decisions. But the films make Thomas more immediate, more reactive. His journey is still one of discovery, but it's more external, defined by the conflicts he faces rather than the inner turmoil of his growing distrust of Wicked. He's less haunted by his past and more focused on the present, making him a more traditional action protagonist rather than the introspective figure he is in the novels. Teresa's character arc is perhaps the most altered between the books and films. In the novel, her relationship with Thomas is complicated, built on shared history and betrayal, on the idea that she, more than anyone, understands what is truly at stake. Her choices are never black and white. She believes in Wicked's mission, even as she questions their methods. She does not see herself as Thomas's enemy, even when their paths diverge. The films simplify this, making her betrayal more direct, turning her into an antagonist for much of the story before redeeming her in the final act. The structure of the story is also streamlined for the films. The books take their time, allowing for moments of introspection, for characters to sit with their trauma, to grapple with the weight of what they've endured. The films move with urgency, cutting away subplots and secondary characters in favor of a more focused narrative. The mazes effectively escape more quickly. The Scorches traverse with greater speed. The final battle with Wicked is more explosive. This makes for a thrilling cinematic experience, but it comes at the cost of depth, of the slow burn horror of realizing just how far Wicked's control extended. I think that some of the most drastic changes occur in the Death Cure. In the book, Wicked's experiments continue in the form of psychological manipulation, offering the immunes the illusion of freedom while still pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The Last City is a deeply controlled environment, a final extension of Wicked's tests, their last attempt to extract what they need before everything collapses. The film transforms this into a more conventional final battle, where the characters storm Wicked's headquarters in a desperate last stand. The scale is larger, the action more intense, but the slow, creeping dread of the book's revelations is almost lost. The ending of both versions follows the same basic outcome. Wicked is destroyed, the world is left in ruins, and the immunes must forge a new beginning, but the tone is different. The book's ending is grim, uncertain. There's no sense of true victory, only escape. The film offers a more definitive sense of closure, a more traditional resolution. Wicked is defeated in the final climactic moment. The immunes find refuge, and there's hope in the form of a cure. Ultimately, though, the Maze Runner series in both book and film form is a story about control, the control of knowledge, of power, of choice. It is about what happens when desperation overrides morality, when the survival of a species is deemed more important than the survival of the individual.
Is it true? Newt, can I have saved him?
You can save us all.
Just leave the others alone.
I promise. I will.
Oh, Thomas.
You should have run.
It may be too late for us. For me.